Afternoon, everybody. I'd like to thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon. Are you getting the most of your specialty channel data for areas to improve now? My name is Tom Hannigan. I lead the Life Sciences Solutions team for LiquidHub. My background is over 20 or so years of experience in commercial data management for the industry. A big part of that has been spent in consulting, but I also spent time working on the manufacturer side of the house. So pretty deep understanding of what manufacturers are using for analytics inside the organization. The goal for today, our panel of experts is going to be talking about specific areas that can be enhanced to provide better quality information to drive both tactical and strategic decision-making for the organization. Before we kick off, though, I just want to go over a couple of logistical items. Today's session is being recorded, so all of the attendees are going to be on mute for the duration of the webinar. A video will be available for download after the webinar, though. Our team will send out an email that includes a link to the download so you can download it for later listening. And on your right-hand side, you'll see a QA panel. Any questions that you have, feel free to enter those in the QA panel, and we'll address them at the end of the discussion. But let's just take a moment. We'll let our speakers introduce themselves. We'll start with Dexter Strong.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dexter Strong. I'm a managing director with LiquidHub, and I'm responsible for overseeing our New England area accounts. Similar to Tom, I've got about 15 years of industry experience. I've worked for several manufacturers and in consulting, and I have experience in IT, commercial ops, and commercial analytics. So try to bring that to the consulting work that I do here at LiquidHub.
Great, thanks, Dexter. Josh?
Hi, guys. I'm Josh Reed. I'm a regional director here at LiquidHub. I'm covering the Midwest and West geographies. I've been in the industry just like these guys for 15 to 20 years or so. I've been in IT. I've actually been in R&D. I've been in finance, and I've covered commercial ops and commercial analytics, and been inside the manufacturing side and the consulting side. So happy to be here.
Thank you both. Look forward to a good discussion. Before we jump in, though, I just want to give those on the phone just a brief introduction of LiquidHub. There may be some we haven't worked with. LiquidHub is an engagement company that combines strategy, design, architecture, and technical experience to really try to create compelling experiences for our clients' customers. As an organization, we work across financial services, healthcare, insurance, retail, and is obviously life sciences, which is what we're here to discuss today. And in life sciences, that focus really is on better engagement with your patients, and that includes your caregivers, people working with patients, healthcare providers, and a big part of today's discussion is how you engage with your channel, specifically pharmacies, patient support hubs, distributors, wholesalers, all of the other constituents that are part of that ecosystem. So today's discussion is really about optimizing the data that's available from those partners. And again, the focus is how do you drive better tactical and strategic decision-making in the organization. And both Dexter and Josh have a great deal of experience working with clients specifically on those. So I think we'll have a good discussion today. And then just briefly on Liquid Analytics, LiquidHub has a platform we call Liquid Analytics, and the experience we'll be talking about today is really driven from working with over 75 brands. And our organization does everything from working with your trade and access teams to design data specifications that align with your channel strategy. We do integration across the commercial ecosystem. We have a big focus on de-identifying patients. And I know one of the areas we'll talk today about is how do you get a better handle, better longitudinal view of patients as they move through the network. And then obviously we operate this platform on behalf of our clients, and that includes working with the partners downstream, again, to make sure the highest quality information is available for decision making. So Dexter, I'll turn things over to you to kick off our topic.
Okay. All right, so we're going to start with sort of, what are the symptoms of knowing that you might be having some challenges with the specialty data, or maybe you're not getting the potential that you could from pulling this data into your organization. So I think that a few bullets here. Probably the first one is people are starting to question the money that's being invested in data contracts, how much we're spending on data, because there's a perception that we're not getting value. And we're not able to really measure the things that we want to measure as far as the brand strategy. Another symptom you will see is in general terms, a lack of trust in the information. Specifically, that will manifest itself as field complaints, field reps bringing up issues around missing dispenses, missing shipments, claiming that there's shortfalls in their compensation. Another challenge would be difficulty in resolving data quality activities and data quality issues. That could be because the data quality work is fragmented in a number of places, or it may be done by one individual and it's not well understood. But there could be a lack of ownership or a lack of a single place to go to get a problem resolved. It's not clear how to resolve data quality issues. Another symptom we've seen is a lot of sort of hidden effort in a variety of departments trying to piece together or fill in gaps in the data, missing data, either trying to looking things up on the internet to get identifiers, or it could be phone calls out to pharmacies to determine patient status. So not having a good control and a good operational cadence around this data can result in a lot of effort in other departments and other areas that use the data to fill in the missing pieces. And then lastly, sometimes we'll see that if the first assumption is that when there's a shift or a trend break, that it's actually a data quality issue. And so rather than trusting the data to be used as a business indicator, the first assumption is that, oh, that must be a data quality issue. That has to be proven to be false before then you can go forward and start using it for decision making. So sort of guilty until proven innocent. So these are some of the symptoms that we see when we start to engage with some of our clients that lead us to doing a further study and further analysis.
Yeah, Dexter, I would even add, on the data purchased question, you get often asked internally, whatever happened with that purchase that we made? What are we doing with that data? And you've been sitting on it and working with it for a while, but it wasn't really communicated outward. You realize that you haven't really been getting the value for the content you purchased. I would even layer on too, beyond sort of the how do you know, there's more of a did you even know? So in some aspects here, and what we've seen when we go into certain clients, they didn't realize that there were some bits of data they could actually purchase. Some folks didn't realize they could go to a specialty pharmacy and contract for for patient level data. They didn't realize they could get certain amounts of detail. Mm-hmm. So this raising the awareness of what's available mm-hmm. beyond just knowing that you have problems inside your organization is key.
Mm-hmm.
And I think on the right, as both of you have talked about some of the symptoms we see in an organization, on the right is generally the way we bucket things. So we'll go into an organization, we'll interview folks, and we'll hear them talk about what their challenges are. And they generally roll into these four buckets of things we hear. One, folks are looking for better insight to manage their business. Two, the ability to follow the full patient journey. As Josh just mentioned, it's often not clear across the organization what's available to track at a patient level, both from an analytical, de-identified manner, but as well as to support patient services. Dexter talked about lots of hidden activities. We hear this pretty often about needing better productivity. And when you think about an analyst who's spending a few hours a week fixing data before they can analyze it, and how many times that happens across the organization, the ripple effect in productivity that has. And then this is a big one, just the overall confidence in data. Dexter touched on this. We hear this pretty regularly. I know the numbers aren't right, but I don't know why, or I just don't trust what I'm seeing. And once you get business users thinking they can't trust the numbers, everything else is hard to do.
All right, so we'll kick off here with that top circle, better insight. Better insight's a pretty broad topic, everybody wants better insight. That's why we're getting data. But I'd highlight here that, our experience in specialty, we've seen there are numerous blind spots that folks have in this area that affect their ability to really manage the business. Key among them, we've got blind spots that go around the patient journey, really understanding the patient experience. If you go by that quote there at the top of the slide, it's hard to get insight into hub activities. If you're familiar with a hub and what hubs do, being able to crack into that and understand, where your patients are at and what's happening to them is key. But a lot of times the content's not available, or the content that you have is hard to access, right? There's a lot of different hoops that it has to go through. But that having that blind spot around the patient experience is something that we've seen happen in a number of places. On the flip side, if we ignore hubs for a little bit, trying to understand the patient story in and amidst your pharmacy network, and seeing what's happening inside of there, that's a huge blind spot as well. It's often the case where a client may already have great data from their hub, and they've got, that's well understood, but that's not the entire story. And you start to understand, maybe I have leakage, or I'm losing line of sight because I don't have visibility into the entire experience of the patient within the SP network. But it doesn't just stop there, though, right? There are a number of other blind spots you have when it comes to insights. Folks may have a lack of trust in the content that you're sharing. Your internal reporting may be called into question because you have incomplete information coming in, and the folks in the field know it when they're getting those reports, right? They know maybe you're only getting data from a hub, or you're only getting data from a small subset of pharmacies, but they happen to be aware of activity over here, right? Well, that calls into question all the good work that you're trying to do because of the lack of completeness. There are other areas as well. So it's not really all about the patient experience too, right? We're talking about everything. So, what do you know all of the product that you have in the channel? Do you know where it is? Can you tie that out? Do you know everything that went out the door and what the outcomes were? Generally speaking, and especially we're dealing with low volume activity, low volume products. So understanding at the detail level of everything that's going on is going to be paramount. On the slide here, we talk about taking a retail approach to a specialty problem. Well, we see that time and time again, because you come in with, heavy lifting, buying big syndicated data sets that you think will solve an analytical problem, when in reality, those data sets are, they're estimated to a certain extent and grossed up, but you need to have the details so that you can find out to individual shipment level sometimes, where did things go, right? So those are some of the blind spots really when it comes to managing insight. I don't know if you guys had any other comments on that.
Yeah, I think to add to that, Josh, we talk here on the slide about key metrics. I'm often amazed that when we go into an organization, simple metrics like how many patients are on commercial product, how many patients are on PAP, is oftentimes not easy to solve. And you can see it in a newly launched drug. Oftentimes right after launch, there's a lot of churn. The data's changing, the data's being fixed. You're asking the same question to 3 people, you're getting 4 different answers. That's pretty typical. But when we see it in mature brands have been in the market for 3 or 4 years, and it's still not clear how many commercial patients are on therapy, it's amazing to me how often that happens. And I think it's some of the things we'll talk about. Just the ability to get and connect data is not as simple as it is in the retail model.
Correct. I would add on too, and we'll touch on this actually in the next bucket. We talk about ability to follow the patient journey. You need to be able to understand, the flow of patients and potentially where they're dropping off. And just, before we get into that, but at a high level, if you want to be able to understand if you have a problem, if you know you have a problem but don't know where, you can't begin to understand how to approach it unless you have the data to understand what the problem really is.
And I think really one of the most critical things is really being able to identify patients across the channel, across all the sources. If you can't do that, then you really can't say how many new patients I have, how many refilling patients I have, or to your point, Tom, that just counting how many active patients I have in total. So I really think having that ability to link patients across the channel, across the pharmacies, the hub, the different service providers, is fundamental to getting these patient level insights that are really available potentially available in this wonderful, very rich channel data that we can get from the pharmacies and the hub, the potential is enormous. But it does take a strategy, and it takes a coordinated management approach to get the value out of it.
Right. I faced a challenge before where, folks would ask, why do I really need, to get this data? I know where my problem is. I know what I need to fix, Okay, well, that may be the case, but if you can't set a baseline, if you can't know precisely where you're at today with the numbers, how will you know what kind of an impact your remedy has, right? And it kind of goes both ways. You want to be informed, you want insight into where the problems might be, but you need that as well so you know what kind of improvements you're making. You have to be able to establish those baselines.
And Josh, to your earlier point, there will always be some blind spots, right? And, you may have an open network, but you may have enough data that you can use that as a representative model, to make conclusions and predictions about your business.
Right.
But I think that's part of, again, having a strategy, communicating appropriately to all the stakeholders so everybody knows what to expect. And like you said, having a baseline so you're under control, and the numbers are for that cohort are understood and predictable.
Right. Now, we've talked a lot about, again, the patient experience and everything, but there are a number of other aspects, and we've highlighted here on the slide that, you may have, an out-of-date view of the payer landscape. You may be slow to react to trends. If things, around the turn of the year, if things change, and folks are re-enrolling or there are changes in the payer landscape, you may not be able to react, right? Even if you have, if your finger's on the pulse of the business and you know kind of what's going on, unless you're looking at the data, it'll be difficult for you to know if there's a shift, something that you couldn't have predicted, right? So being able to get the content and get it fully attributed with this important information around payer and other attributes that help you understand the market, that's going to be key as well.
So let's talk, Josh, I think we've done a pretty good job of laying out some of the indicators of business teams that aren't getting the insight they need. I think we've got 4 things laid out here that we think are good foundational steps to try to resolve.
Yeah, I'll sum it up in 1: get more data. But the truth is, the answer is in getting the data, and that's what we're talking about, right? But how do you do that? You need to have a good contracting strategy. You may not already be contracting for information or data from hubs and SPs and distributors and what have you. Or maybe you already are, but maybe the contracts that you have are incomplete, or they don't allow you to have the components of data necessary for you to do the analysis that you need. But in any case, you need to assure yourself that you've got a contracting strategy in place that's aligned to the brand strategy and what they're trying to measure and what they're trying to improve, right? So that you've got all the components necessary to measure the outcomes and be able to track the progress that's necessary. All that business performance we talked about before, you can lay that into a contract, but you've got to make sure at the contracting stage you're asking for the data up front. That's step 1. Step 2, similar, again, making sure that, the data that you do obtain is ideally formatted the same way. So if you're going to go out and obtain information from an external provider, you're going to want to stitch that together somehow, right? And in order to do that, you want to make sure that it's on a standard format, something that quality and timeliness can be enforced reliably and not scattered around. This is something that we've seen where, historical or legacy contracts that manufacturers may have with pharmacies vary. They were established over time, they grew organically, and they are not apples to apples. So if you want to solve an analytical problem, you need to have a consistent, thorough data set, right? Ultimately, this all rolls up into well-defined reporting and KPIs and things that are measurable that that you can track, monitor, and ultimately improve. So this goes back to being blind and not knowing where your problem is to being able to shift, identify the problem, measure the baseline, measure the improvement, and know how your improvement program actually related. Lastly, and maybe most important, once you've contracted the data, right, and once you've got a stable and consistent definition of the data coming in from your providers, if you want to be able to tell that patient's story, analytically across your network. You've got to be able to tie the patient, or kind of tie that thread of the patient throughout the network. And the way you do that is through patient tokenization. This is something where you establish this longitudinal identifier that is unique to that individual, but is the same no matter where you go, pharmacy or hub. It's de-identified and it's safe, but from an analytical perspective, it allows you to trace someone's activity from, say, a hub to a pharmacy, from a pharmacy to a pharmacy. It helps you understand what that real experience is, and it helps you maintain line of sight into an individual. If we've established that keeping an eye on the journey is critical, you want to be able to keep that line of sight no matter where they go organizationally. And if a patient hops from one feed to the next, you need to make sure you've got this tokenization put in place. Good?
Very good.
Yeah,
All right.
I think on this, yeah, like you said, Josh, consistency is key. A lot of times when we go in, we see, like you said, maybe inconsistent data formats, and it's hard to measure something if you're not collecting it from everybody. So consistency in the contracting, and then looking at the metrics up front and then building that in, I think is key. But a lot of times what we find is, the consistency isn't there, and then maybe the data is kind of not is a freebie. Maybe it's not. The data isn't part of a specific data contract. It's just kind of a favor, and that becomes difficult to enforce. And it becomes, because our approach is really to hold the data provider accountable. Our approach is to enforce the contract, hold the data provider accountable, get them to send good quality data. And if those types of understandings are not built into the business agreement or the contract with the data provider, it's difficult to enforce. And that leaves the manufacturer in a place of having to fill the gaps or just live with what they get, right? Which leads with kind of the other things we talked about, sort of suboptimal quality and lack of trust in the information.
Right.
So I really think bullet number one here, the contracting strategy driven by the SLAs and the metrics is key.
Yeah. Back when I was on the manufacturing side, I was faced with a problem where I had legacy contracts. I was getting the data that I got. I inherited the system, right? But then I was handed this scorecard. We go back to the third point on KPIs. Josh, can you implement this scorecard? I couldn't do any of it. I didn't have any of the data necessary to calculate these things, and this was critical for for the trade team. Actually, they're trying to manage their business, and they needed to understand this information. And here we were buying all this data, and it was great, but it did not help because I couldn't calculate.
It was inconsistent.
It was inconsistent, and it was incomplete. It could have been more. It needed to be more. This was kind of early on in our journey over there, but yeah, you can't back in to your KPI.
Right.
Those KPIs need to really be, it could even be a step one. Think about them first. Understand what you need, line it up to the brand strategy, then go and get the data.
Yep.
Make sure those contracts give you and deliver for you what they need. And trust me, they can.
Mm-hmm.
So next, we'll dive in a little bit more into the patient journey. So this is something that we talked about quite a bit. It comes up time and again. When it comes to patient journey, it's sort of the classic blind spot, right? Folks kind of understand, what they need from a channel like management perspective and what have you, and product reporting. Patient journey is a little bit unique, and it's unique here because this is specialty, and well, that's special, right? So what makes it special? It's hard to know what kind of audience we've got here, but just to be clear, when we're talking about patient journey in this context, we're not really emphasizing the aspects of the patient's experience on therapy. A lot of times when you think patient experience, patient journey, you're thinking about them after having received the therapy and what's happening, tracking the events. And that's critical, and don't get me wrong, we have to look at that. But in specialty, it's more about what happens before they get on therapy, right? So when we talk about patient journey, it has everything to do with the time that prescription was written or referral was written by the doctor. And if not before that, when the patient is visiting the doctor and understanding that, but that experience leading all the way up to the day that they get therapy and getting that approval. So what does that really mean? We're looking at the hops from an enrollment type of a scenario or an event that occurs at a pharmacy or a hub. We're looking at benefits investigations and verifications. We're looking at prior auths. We're looking at, all of the different, aspects of helping manage the patient get access to the drug through the payer landscape, right, and everything there. And this would include appeals for primary, secondary appeals, and all of those interactions, right? So that's the journey, and kind of following that patient through that journey enables you over time and over a vast data set to see patterns, right? So you want to be able to know if it's consistent or not, that when a patient on your therapy or using the folks in your network fall out of the program at a particular stage, right? There are unique challenges to every therapeutic area and to every insurance company and what have you. You got to understand that journey, though, to be able and map it out, to know that you need to get the data that maps to that journey so you can accurately map activity over a set of patients into that pathway. So really the question is, can you tell that story for your patients on your therapy or for your brands, or maybe you're launching something new and you already know that you need this, it's going to be a challenge, and up front, we think the journey is going to look like this. We want to contract this way. We want to get data that helps us tell the story. We need all the status information. But, you want to be able to have this data set that enables you to track it, that enables you to see, well, what happens when circumstances change? What happens if, payers change, pharmacies change? What happens with a patient if they move from one SP to the next? Do the outcomes change? I'd like to know analytically, right?
Josh, sorry to interrupt. We had a very good example of this, a client we recently started working with. There was a problem in their Medicare patient population, and delays started happening, and it was pretty recently after they had gone through a recontracting and were getting status level data. And what it allowed us to see was this issue pop up where suddenly the delay time of getting through the process for Medicare patients went up, 10 times. And suddenly it was hard for them to get on therapy. And when speaking with the brand, what they told us is, in our old model, it would have taken us 6 months to even figure out this was happening, never mind why it was happening or what segment it was happening in. So to your point, having that data coming in on a daily basis, you're able to spot trends much more quickly than you could if you waited on claims data or syndicated data sets that you wouldn't see that impact for months.
Correct. I mean, a lot of times this data is being used not just analytically, but perhaps even operationally, working with your hub or pharmacies or what have you, if you want to spot a problem. But you need to understand what those trends are so that you can react to them. I was asked a number of times, Josh, we have leakage. We're losing patients somewhere in the process. Either they're canceling or they're discontinuing one or the other. And what's happening, and sometimes the data sets don't support that. Sometimes you go in and you don't get adequate detail that explains to you reasons why folks would back out of the process. And you don't know when along the way that event would occur. Are they canceling after enrollment? Was there a bad experience after enrollment? Is there a problem with your case manager if you're using a case manager at the hub? Is it happening after benefits investigation? Are they bailing after appeals? You want to kind of get that sequence in there, and you want to have those reasons. I didn't have that initially. You need the data to support that. Otherwise, you be like me and be able to say, yeah, well, out of so many patients that came into the hub or came into the network, 50% got onto therapy, but I have no idea what happened to that 50%. They're just poof, they're gone. You've got you've got to have the an adequate understanding of the detail and the data to be able to tell that story.
Yeah, I think I might be jumping to the next slide, but I do think this is a part of the contracting experience also, is setting this up appropriately so that you're getting the detail, that you need. For instance, when patients cancel, is it because we couldn't contact the patient? Was it financial? Was it an adverse event? So getting enough detail, but not too much detail, because there are a lot of activities that the manufacturer doesn't care about that aren't significant. So making sure that when we're contracting, we're defining the status and substatus codes standard across the pharmacies and the hub, and we're capturing the significant things that we want to capture. Because a lot of times what we see is clients are getting status, but first off, it's inconsistent. They're not getting it from everybody. And secondly, it's not at the appropriate level of detail. There's excessive use of other or something like that. So it definitely has to be defined clearly up front. And then the other thing is really monitoring it. It has to be monitored over time, because pharmacies will tend to slip into what's easiest for them. So it has to be tracked just like other data quality metrics.
Right. So how do you fix it? Well, number one, we talked about contracting. We've touched on that. So you get the data. You need to integrate that data together. It's challenging, to say the least, if you're getting feeds from a number of data providers, and great as they may be, if it's not in one cohesive picture, you can't tell where that patient is. You can't really stitch together the story. You need to stack that status up. If you're getting patient information, stack it up across your SPs, across your hub.
Standardize it.
Standardize it. Give yourself the ability to see the entire sort of history, if you will, of a patient trying to get on your therapy. And that involves obtaining data, say, from a hub, classically getting data from a hub, and then getting data from a pharmacy after the hub is finished and triage them to the pharmacy, by maintaining that line of sight. So that's step number one, integrating all the data sets. That's what enables us to tell that consistent picture. But number two, we talked about it before, patient tokenization. So I can't know that individual is the same individual, and I don't know who they are, mind you, right? But by some de-identified ID, know that same individual at the hub is also this individual at the pharmacy. Got to have that, otherwise I can't tell that story and I lose line of sight again. To me, it looks like another individual. And oh, by the way, if you are looking across an integrated data set and you haven't done the patient tokenization, it's very, very, very difficult to get an accurate count of patients on your therapy.
And this, Josh, just to add to that, this is another one of those areas that surprises me often when we're in an organization and we're talking about mature, large, successful brands. When you think about the retail model, when you're buying, big loads of data from IMS or Symphony, it gets loaded in a central place, and it led to an easier centralization of metrics. What we find a lot today is data may be coming in from the hub just to the patient services team, and there's pharmacy data that may be coming into a warehouse that's more dispense related and access related. And oftentimes those data sets aren't put together. So if you're just worrying about dispenses, you don't necessarily need to do that. But more and more, we're seeing brands that want to know what's happening with that patient as they move through the journey, which absolutely requires that full integration in some centralized manner of that information.
Yeah. As we discussed earlier, it's knowing how long it takes them to go through those early steps before they come on therapy, and flagging patients that are stuck, that are taking a long time to get through that benefits verification process.
Yeah.
Or maybe they've been handed around to a couple different pharmacies. When you have that patient ID, that common patient ID, you can actually see that. Yeah. And it's really cool to see it all kind of line up like that. And then maybe they go back to the hub, then they go to a different pharmacy. You can see the whole story.
Yeah, it is cool when you finally see it come together.
Yeah.
Then we get to step three. What are you doing with that? Okay, so yeah, you've integrated the data. You contracted before, you've done the patient tokenization, you've got this wonderful data set, right? But you've got to have also some reporting, some sort of alert, some means by which you can use this very timely data. I mean, let's be honest. One of the things that sets this data apart from the syndicated data is the timeliness of it. It comes to you a day or two, away, as opposed to weeks or months or what have you. And it enables you to use it for an operational purpose. You can use it as an alert. Send a note to somebody in your home office, or perhaps you have a field reimbursement team, that a patient is stuck in the process. They've been pending with benefits investigation for 3 days. Okay, can someone follow up? Right. Well, typically that would be a phone call, and everybody's tracking patients in spreadsheets and what have you. But you use this, and you can automate that capability, and folks can be much more efficient and timely with their follow-up on patient activities with hubs and pharmacies.
And this is a more recent trend we've seen. Initially, when we talk with brands, oftentimes we'll hear we're too conservative, we don't want to share that information. But working with our privacy officer, working with our clients' privacy officers, we've been able to figure out ways where you can give actionable data to field users without them needing PHI. So someone can walk into an office and help with a reimbursement challenge in a fully HIPAA compliant, de-identified way, But Josh, to your point, it's happening now instead of, us learning 6 months from now that that patient never got on. We know it's a challenge now. Maybe it's a specific prescriber that's not filling out the enrollment forms correctly, or some challenge in their office that's leading to delays in getting benefits investigation approval. Those are things that can be fixed more real time.
And then lastly, we have a note here, rationalizing status codes across the network. So it deserves to be highlighted. It's not just enough to integrate the data, but the content that you receive from the data providers is going to give you some semblance of status of a patient. And the codes that they're communicating to you of the various steps along the way, these tell you the journey, but hopefully it's in the same language, that it's apples to apples. So if one pharmacy calls benefits verification one thing and another pharmacy calls it another, it's going to be difficult to really translate that and tell the consistent story. If you want to be able to trace that pathway, that patient through your process, you need to be able to rationalize and standardize even the status codes that you're getting from the different data providers.
And you're either doing that at the data provider level with your contracts, or you're doing it with a data aggregator or an internal data integration capability. So it's even if you can't get all of your pharmacies to line up with those codes, we have ways where we can map them so that they become a single view when you see it in a reporting layer. Yep. It's critical.
Okay, so this next area we're going to explore a little bit talks about kind of productivity, opportunities to improve productivity, really in a variety of areas in the company by improving really the management of this specialty data. So the challenge, and I think we alluded to this at the top of the webinar, some of the challenges that we see are really kind of hidden costs in different departments. So in patient services, you see a lot of phone calls out to the pharmacy. So we're working with a client who, if they don't hear back from the pharmacy that the referral was received within a day or two, they make a call. So there's a phone call right there. And case managers are expecting patients to get refills on a certain cycle. If they don't see them, there's another phone call. So one of the objectives that we look to achieve is, let's see if we can reduce those phone calls if the patient services group can trust the status information that we're getting from the pharmacies rather than having to make a phone call. Another thing we've seen with other clients is a lot of dispute investigation and resolution, a lot of effort going into this in incentive compensation. Formal processes for reps to submit complaints about missing dispenses, and then the long process of adjudicating that. And then another thing we've seen is really data fixing in the analytics group, where the contracts don't have the teeth, to be enforced. Key identifiers are missed, and the analytics group is looking up information on the internet to fill in. So identifiers can be filled in and data can be matched. So these are some of the problems and some of the things that we try to address. Why don't we go to the next slide? So the first is really standardizing the flow of the specialty data into the organization. A lot of times we will see the data coming in through multiple entry points. There might be some coming in through the hub, there might be some coming in through a REMS provider, and there might be some coming directly into the manufacturer. Our strong recommendation is a single point of entry for all the specialty data, to centralize that through our platform so that we can manage and hold every data provider accountable to everything that they send. So we can track every issue and hold the providers accountable. So having an integrated data flow architecture with the specialty data flowing through a single point and then disseminating out to the various groups that need it, I think is a really important first step, and it's a key part of every engagement that we do is a high-level data flow diagram that in a lot of cases kind of rewires how this information flows through the organization. I think number two, we've talked a bit about the patient tokenization, but it's critical to master all of the dimensions, including the payer. The payer is a big one, because what you get back from the pharmacies is free text, payer or plan name, and some adjudication codes. So we work with other third parties to standardize that so you can actually report on it and consistently identify the payers. We mentioned about having the common KPIs across the organization to drive the contracting strategy. And then I'd say the last thing is really not just the architecture, but also having the operational structure of centralized data management, of not having it in a variety of different areas, having it in one place with a very strong management, service levels defined, accountability, and a strong operational cadence of daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly activities to manage the data quality. So, I really think the key things are having an architecture, centralizing the flow of the data through an aggregator, and then having a strong operation that's actively and proactively managing the data quality and pushing back on the data providers and enforcing the contracts.
Yeah, I think we would generally call that governance, which sometimes organizations have an aversion to. Mm-hmm. But I think the main concept is put processing in one place and put fixing in one place. Yep. Let's not have multiple people trying to solve the same problem over and over again.
And provide visibility.
Right.
Yep. And kind of continuing along on this similar thought of how to improve confidence in the data. It's about consistency. It's about delivering consistency, being transparent, and having a solid process in place and a well-architected approach. So certainly with these things in place, you can eliminate a lot of the symptoms we've been talking about. So why don't we go to the next slide? So, we talked about centralizing the governance and management of these assets. So manufacturers are paying a lot of money to acquire this data. But it needs to be managed. It does not manage itself. And there's a lot of change that happens in the specialty world. Pharmacies merge. There's new regulations. There's new technology capabilities. This area is not standing still. And managing change is another large aspect of the value that an aggregator can bring in terms of dealing with these pharmacies in multiple settings and getting early warning of changes that are coming. I think we've talked about, training the end users. Make sure they understand the limitations. The data does have limitations. It's not perfect. The status data that we get is typically the last status at the end of the day. You may have an open network. You may have 340B. You may have Kaiser. You may have some black holes. We need to explain that. So that doesn't mean everything's worthless. It's just a caveat that needs to be explained to people. It needs to be positioned, correctly, and conclusions drawn appropriately based on the data set that you have. So that's about setting expectations and communicating up front what's possible. I mentioned before about the payer information, standardizing that, I think is key to understanding what Josh was describing before about if you have a change in the payer environment, say in the beginning of the year, being able to understand that and act on it quickly. And then I've mentioned this a couple times, having well-defined processes. And one of the key things here is you really can't just trust one source. You have to have multiple sources of information and use them to validate each other. So for instance, use the status data to know if you should have gotten a dispense. If SP is saying it's shipped, you should have a dispense. So use that as an indicator of a missing dispense. Use the inventory data, get a summary at the end of the month and total up all the dispenses that you got for the month against that monthly total. These are simple things, but it's just putting that rigorous process in place to track them starts to build confidence. And then when the users in the information see that and they see the consistency that comes from it and the process that's built around it, that's when the trust starts to improve.
think that, both in terms of productivity and with, quality and what have you, one of the things that I've seen in the past is, especially in specialty, you come into this with the notion that the data volumes are low and it's easily managed. And so you have an individual who's managing everything in a set of spreadsheets, right? They're managing all the shipment data if they're getting any. They're managing status data that same way. They're standardizing payer. They're mastering customer. I mean, everything in spreadsheets, right? This big spread mart type of concept. And that's not a bad thing when maybe in the very, very beginning, but that becomes onerous relatively quickly. You've got all your eggs in one basket, right, with one individual. The rules aren't really well established and it doesn't scale, right? Yeah. But this happens in a number of places where this is where they start out. And in order to become more productive, you got to take that burden off the team, because before you know it, they're spending half their day, like the other slide said, 20 hours of my week spent munging the data and cleaning data ahead of time. That's where you're headed, right? If you automate, if you get the aggregation going, you build the standard rules over standard data sets, get the governance in place, it really helps clean things up, and it frees your people to do different things.
And then the data is trusted and it's ready to go when you need it, instead of, it's the end of the month now, I've got to clean everything up before we, run our compensation. So.
All right, great. Thank you, guys. So I think we have a couple of minutes before questions, but I think we just wanted to touch briefly on something we hear all the time is great. We have the same challenges you guys have called out. What do we do? How do we fix this? And there's organizations that try to do this internally, but we also offer an assessment framework that we use with companies, and this is really useful for brands that are a little more mature. When you think about your contracts, you're on addendum 47 of a contract that was written 5 years ago. Maybe the organization hasn't stepped back and reevaluated how things are being managed. So this is something we do for clients today, and it's typically a couple of weeks, and it's people from different disciplines. So it's people with contracting and operations experience. It's people with data management experience. It's people with data privacy and security experience. This happens to be the model we use. So when we do come into a client that we're not working with, we look across all of these dimensions and really try to evaluate how they're managing their data. So when you think about scorecarding and quality, what things are set up with the data providers, what SLAs in place, how often are they meeting them? From a channel and sourcing point of view, really looking at who your channel partners are, what data they're providing. Is there things they're not providing that they said they would, which of course is a compliance issue. But more importantly, is there things you can get that you're not getting today? And then how standard or consistent is it? From an operating point of view, is there a team or a process internally that's managing this data effectively? Or does it go to 10 different people depending on the brand, and really things are not consistent? We talked a lot about patient today. When you're dealing with patient level information, security and privacy is key. And again, this is an area that a lot of our clients have a pretty good handle on, but we oftentimes will run into an odd case of, here's a piece of data that's going somewhere it shouldn't go, and maybe someone just wasn't aware how they had to protect that data differently. And then finally, from an insights point of view, another area we run into is something we touched on earlier, is that data contracts should be driven by the brand strategy, and oftentimes we find a disconnect. So what is the brand trying to measure? What are the goals of the brand, and how does that lead to KPIs and metrics that can be measured? And then how do we get the data to support that? So when we come in and do an assessment, we look across all of these. So whether it's with us or whether it's something you're doing internally, we think this is a good model for really evaluating the way you're managing data today and finding areas for improvement. We can jump briefly to the output of this generally is a set of recommendations. This happens to be a maturity model. Many folks on the phone have probably seen maturity models before, but the idea is that as you move left to right, you become more repeatable and more consistent with how you process. And the goal isn't to get to level 5 and be perfect. The goal is to look at the areas that you're not doing well and try to focus on those. And typically when we assess an organization, we can plot them somewhere on here and give leadership an idea of, how do we compare to everybody else? Are we doing this well? Are we not doing it well? And the areas we're not doing well, what should we focus on? What's our roadmap look like? So just some food for thought around how to attack this. So I think that brings us to our Q&A session. We have a few questions lined up. Sure. All right. So the first one here, I'll for Dexter and Josh. How much detail can we actually get from a pharmacy? So I assume that question is around, is there more we're getting or we can get that we're not getting today?
Right. So I think that, so we've talked quite a bit about the necessity of getting detailed information from pharmacies and hubs so that you can understand the patient journey. But in reality, can you actually get the information? I think is where the question is coming from. And the truth is, that most pharmacies, in our experience, have the capabilities within their systems to give you adequate patient-level detail on a daily basis with enough sub-status information to let you know where they're at on the journey. Now, there may be caveats. Just a little bit ago, Dexter mentioned how pharmacies usually can only give you something, the most recent status at the end of the day, that type of thing. But getting a status every day of a particular detail from a pharmacy is sure better than not getting any. But the answer to the question is that, yes, most pharmacies certainly can offer a substantial level of detail, both in attributes that describe the transactions, whether dispense transactions or patient activity, and can describe the actual status event with some level of detail as well.
Great, thanks, Josh. So just a reminder, if there's any questions on the phone, there's the chat box on the right. Feel free to enter questions there. We've got one, Dexter, that I think falls in your wheelhouse. It's a problem I know you've been struggling with recently with a client. But what are the pros and cons of recontracting versus keeping your existing contracts when you transition to a data aggregator?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think it comes down to kind of two things. One is, is there a kind of an urgent or burning operational need to essentially manage the data better? Is one driver. And then the other driver is there a need for additional information or new capability, such as the patient tokenization? So if there's a need for new capability or new information that you don't get today, such as the tokenization, that you have to recontract to get that if you're not getting that today. So, however, if you really want to just attack some of the trust and data accuracy and data quality issues, those a lot of times can be attacked without recontracting by bringing in a data aggregator. Again, some of it depends on what's in the contracts and how much we can enforce in there. And some of that can be worked through relationships, with the data providers, with the SPs, and more proactive management by LiquidHub. But so that's how I would break it down. If there isn't a pressing need for new information, and the needs are more operational around data quality and trust in the data, then make the transition with your existing contracts and recontract later. But if there's a strong need in the organization for additional capability, and for instance, maybe you're not really operating at the patient level right now, you're more just doing field compensation and prescriber level reporting, and you really want to get to the patient level, then that's most likely going to be a recontracting effort where we do the tokenization and we'd look at the status codes, we'd standardize the status codes and get the patient status that we need to track the patient journey.
Okay, great, thanks, Dexter. So just a follow-up for me, do you have a sense to where do manufacturers typically go? Is it 50-50 or do they?
My experience has been about 50-50.
Okay.
Seen both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So taking over the existing process versus a complete recontracting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. And then question, do you aggregate? I assume that means is LiquidHub a data aggregator? And yes, the question is yes. I won't go into too much of a commercial, but the platform we talked about earlier, Liquid Analytics, is a specialty data aggregation platform that was designed in 2012 specifically for meeting these challenges. So we absolutely do. And then here's a question. What are some of the interesting tactical decisions you have seen manufacturers make with this data? Obviously keeping client confidentiality, but what are what are some of the more interesting uses you guys have seen of this data?
Well, I think, one thing is just at the patient level, being able to basically using it to call out to pharmacies and, work through patient cases that are held up. And that's done in a de-identified way. Like Tom was mentioning before, that to be able to do that, you have to set it up correctly such that everything is de-identified, including the IDs that we get from the pharmacies. But that's one, very, very active and kind of operational use that I see.
Well, I have another operational use too. I find the data is very, very useful for operational needs because it's so timely. But I worked with a product that was used in an emergency scenario for infants actually, and we were able to actually use this content because it was so timely to help with restocking of the medication at the doctor's office in a rapid way, so that there wouldn't be any delay for subsequent patients to get on the emergency therapy. So it goes on and on. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll just add another brief one. We have a client where field reimbursement managers were making a lot of phone calls to the hub to check on specific patients, and enabling that field alerting reporting capability we talked about. We now had those FRMs using our analytics. It basically cut the calls to zero to the hub. So again, now you have patient services people aren't dealing with phone calls from the field. All right, here's an interesting question. I think this is one we run into pretty often. We've been facing challenges tracking hub patients at pharmacies due to HIPAA between hubs and pharmacies. How can LiquidHub help? So I think this one's really asking about that situation where a pharmacy either doesn't receive consent or doesn't recognize consent, doesn't include that hub ID, and then you're trying to match that data back together. I think this is something we run into pretty often.
I think, the pharmacies can be sticklers about this, and different pharmacies some are more stringent than others, but they're looking for, signed patient signature on the start form, typically on the same page as the consent language. They can be sticklers about that, and if they don't have that, they won't send you back your hub ID. I would assume that's what this is referring to. If the pharmacy doesn't acknowledge consent, we can't provide that data back to the manufacturer. We cannot bridge that, or re-identify that patient.
Right.
So
I think this is where, Dexter, the de-identification process comes in, and I think this is where you have to separate what can be shared and what can be analyzed.
Yep.
We had a client, for example, what was happening in the process is the field was being incented to drive patients through the hub, and what happened in reality is that the doctors were now sending referrals to both the hub and the pharmacies, which created a lot of duplication. And you can imagine the hub is saying, this is my patient, the pharmacy is saying it's my patient. A big question for them was, what is the percentage of patients driven through the hub? So using a DID technology, we can answer that question. We can't necessarily, if there isn't consent, tell the manufacturer who they are. So I think it comes down to, what are you trying to use it for? If it's trying to analyze how many patients, where do they come from, what's direct versus indirect, that's easily solved. If it's, how do I interact with this patient without consent, that's difficult.
Yeah, I think there's two uses. One is, we can treat that as one patient in our analytics, okay? But what we can't do is we can't re-identify the pharmacy-provided information back to the hub for that patient.
Correct.
But we can still count that as one patient when we're counting up our patients,
right.
by using the de-identification.
Yes. Suffice to say, this question is a little more of this is usually more of a discussion.
Yeah.
I think there is solutions, but it's probably something that needs to be worked through. I think that's it. I don't see any other questions. I think we're right up against our time. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for their time today. We hope this was useful. We appreciated having a chance to talk about our experience and some of the things we've seen be effective with clients. If there is additional questions, or if you need to contact us or didn't get a chance to ask, we can be reached at engage@liquidhub.com. Again, that's engage@liquidhub.com. And with that, I thank everyone for their time. Thanks to our panelists for their expert opinion. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.